So good evening. Welcome to Must Read TV, the Skylark Bookshop Virtual Authors Series. My name is Alex George, and I'm the owner of Skylark, which is an independent bookstore in downtown Columbia, Missouri. I don't know when you last sat down to watch two individuals have a discussion online, but for anyone who is still recovering from last night's debate, I can promise you that this evening's proceedings will be infinitely superior in absolutely every way to what happened in Cleveland yesterday. So hopefully a nice antidote to all of that nonsense. Tonight, I am very pleased to welcome to Skylark two wonderful writers, Joanna Eleftheriou and Michele Morano. Both Joanna and Michele have recently published collections of personal essays, and we're thrilled that they're here to read from their books and discuss them and not interrupt each other ever. I don't know if maybe I'm promising too much.
We'll see.
Joanna is an assistant professor of English at Christopher Newport University, a contributing editor of Essay, a journal of nonfiction studies, and a faculty member at the writing workshops in Greece. And I will go on record as saying that is a gig I would very much like to have. Her essays, short stories, and translations appear regularly in journals, including Appalachia Review, Cutbank, Arts and Letters, and The Common. Based in Hampton Roads, Virginia, she regularly spends time in New York, Cyprus, and Greece. Kirkus gave her debut essay collection, This Way Back, a starred review, calling it winning and contemplative, and forward reviews described it as heartfelt and heart-rending. And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't also mention that Joanna holds a PhD in creative writing from none other than the University of Missouri, Columbia. And we are very happy to welcome her back to Columbia, although obviously the word back is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Michele Morano is the author of the books Like Love, and Grammar Lessons, Translating a Life in Spain. Her essays and short fiction have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including Best American Essays, Fourth Genre, Ninth Letter, and Waveform, 21st Century Essays by Women, and the Missouri Review. She has received numerous honors and awards from the Illinois Arts Council, the MacDowell Colony, and the American Association of University Women, among others. Michele holds an MFA in nonfiction writing and a PhD in English from the University of Iowa. She is a professor and current chair of the English department at DePaul University and lives in Chicago. Joanna and Michele will be in conversation for about 40 minutes or so. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And if you're watching on Facebook, because we're streaming there too, please put your questions in the comments. And I will reappear towards the end of the discussion to ask those questions for you at the end of the evening. If you enjoyed this evening's presentation, please, please, please do help us out and purchase these two wonderful books from Skylark. To reserve your copies, give us a call at 573-777-6990 or drop us a line at mail@skylarkbookshop.com and we will call you back in the morning and take care of everything for you. Right, that's me done. I'm going to hopefully make myself disappear now and turn it over to Joanna and Michele. Take it away, guys.
Thank you. I will start because Joanna and I discussed this beforehand. Her book's official book publication day is October 1st, correct? And so, yay, we're going to celebrate the birthday of her book here. And so, I am going to be her opening act and read first, and then she will read, and then we'll ask each other some questions. I just did want to say to begin with, deep, deep, deep gratitude to Alex and to Skylark Books, and to all of the people who are tuning in, all 25 people, which is amazing on a Wednesday evening. Yeah, we really appreciate your being here. And I am particularly honored because I really love Joanna's book and I have a million questions for her. So I'm excited to talk about that. But also I will offer advance apologies. I'm in Chicago where it is cold now and also still allergy season. So I hope that I'm not going to sneeze and cough at any point, but that's what we're dealing with right now. So I'm going to start by reading a little bit from Like Love. This is a memoir in essays that focuses on the topic of unconsummated, or revolves around the topic of unconsummated romance. So the book is interested in crushes and infatuations and all of the various odd and delightful ways that we happen into entanglements with other people that are, have the kind of frisson of romance, but that we know from the start, often we know from the start, are not going to have any sort of romantic future. And so it's kind of an offbeat series of love stories. And in honor of Joanna's book, which is really a great book to be reading at this point in time when we are locked down and unable to travel, those of us who really would like to be going places, it's just a delight to go with her to Cyprus and to Greece and to various other places and kind of luxuriate in those locales. So in honor of that, I'm going to read from the title essay of my book, which is the only piece in it that could properly be called a travel essay. And it takes place in Hamburg, Germany. It's a story of the most romantic weekend of my life that involved traveling alone to Hamburg, Germany, encountering a young man named, this was not too long after college, I encountered a young man named Thomas at the youth hostel. We became immediate fast friends. We spent the whole weekend together. We did any number of incredibly romantic things, and yet there was never kind of a romantic charge between us. It was very situational. So I'm just going to read from a section on the second day of our time together. Soon we were on the S-Bahn riding into the suburbs. Thomas was curious about what it might be like to live in Hamburg, and we scrutinized the neighborhoods that passed, pointing out houses we liked and discussing their brick construction. "Do you live in a wooden house?" he asked, and I said I did. "But wood burns," he stated, an expression of alarm on his face. "Everything inside a brick house also burns," I countered. That prompted a discussion of the Great Fire of London and the Chicago Fire and the firebombing of Hamburg at the end of World War II. We scrolled through past history lessons, digging up clumps of fact and pressing them into a mosaic of transatlantic education. I'd always been embarrassed by how much I didn't know about geography and history, but chatting with Thomas felt like stretching muscles, taking stock, finding common ground. Instead of feeling with shame that I ought to know more, I felt curious, excited to learn. We rode nearly to the end of the line, then got off the train and waited for the return trip. On the small platform nestled in a quiet neighborhood of single-story homes, we pulled our sweaters close and shook our heads at the clouds that had arrived yet again. "It is warmer in the south," Thomas remarked, and I said I looked forward to going there. He asked what time my train to Copenhagen left in the morning. "Early," I said, 8:15. Then silence. The S-Bahn arrived and we sat down, gazing toward the opposite side of the tracks we'd just traveled. We rode back through the same neighborhoods, not commenting on the houses or the parks, no longer imagining what it would be like to live here or talking about the future. The contrast with just a little while ago was stark. Then we'd been animated, excited, on an adventure, and now we were coming back, coming down, entering the last stage of this curious weekend. Back in Hamburg, we ate slices of pizza for dinner and walked to the Reeperbahn, the red light district where the theater housing Cats was located. Thomas bought a ticket for the following evening's show, and his full body excitement at realizing this dream made me wish I could go too. He suggested I stay one more day, but that was impossible, since the friend I planned to visit in Copenhagen would be leaving on a business trip in a few days. And anyway, I didn't want to spend more time in Hamburg. I liked the city a great deal, but I was ready to unmoor myself again, enter unfamiliar territory, experience the frisson of anxiety and expectation a new place brings. That's what this trip was about, jarring myself into some new perspective that might help me navigate the future at home. Still, the sadness of endings was upon us, and despite not wanting to stay, I didn't entirely want to go. As we walked past plate glass windows decorated with whips and leather vests, past signs announcing sexy shop and bar erotic, silence overtook us. This was a different Hamburg than the one we'd been exploring. Here, the undercurrents of intimacy were on the surface, advertised in neon. I wasn't sure how to respond or whether to respond, but soon Thomas waved his hand back and forth, gesturing toward the entire block. "This is life," he said, shrugging, and I shrugged back. And then the awkwardness was gone, and we were ourselves again, only more so. Waiting to cross a street, I felt Thomas's hand against my back as he leaned in to say something, and the only surprise was how natural this felt, how impossible that 48 hours before I hadn't known him. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Michele. That was incredible. And actually, to the audience, we didn't talk about which questions we're going to ask each other because we want that energy of the unexpected, just as that trip was for Michele. But that was one of my questions because I have a question about that essay because I just love it so much and it spoke to me. And I guess you kind of articulated why that journey is something that I have been compelled by for a long time. And we should also say Michele's first book is very much a book of travel essays, which we studied when you came to Missouri as a visiting writer several years ago, and I met you for the first time. So with that, thank you, Michele. Thank you, Alex, so much for having us and for allowing me to come back to a place that was so important to me. It's weird even to say it in the past tense. That Columbia, Missouri is a past part of my life, but I'm coming back. And thank you to all my teachers there. And Michele, you were one of my teachers, one of those fleeting teachers that we have, just as you write about, I think, fleeting romances. I'm interested in, also I have an essay about the eroticism of teaching and like the excitement of that, that dovetails really nicely with your book. But I have so much to say, but I'm going to read a little bit from Cypress Pride, which is an essay that has to do with sexuality. And there's a protest. It's the first Pride parade in Cyprus. And there's a protest and it's taking on an interesting, different dimension because when I wrote this essay in 2014, I felt like America was a safer place to be than Cyprus, which was homophobic. During my first year of graduate school in Missouri, when I was 32, a Greek Orthodox priest told me that being gay was not a sin, but more like being deformed. It doesn't damn you, he said. It merely keeps you from some of the pleasures of being alive. Later, after I had left that incense-filled church on Stadium, and that cushioned pew where at my side the Orthodox priest repeated the words clubfoot while pumping his shiny black shoe, I recalled Sparta and the mountain where the Greeks discarded the infants that had been born deformed. When I was 13, my family toured Greece, using a relative's house in Athens as our base. We visited historical sites in the Peloponnese and the Attic peninsulas. Among them, Sparta's tallest mountain, Diaetos. We drove together up the slopes of the mountain and stood on the spot where, I had learned in school, the ancients had left their infants out to die if they were born sickly or imperfectly formed. From that mountain, every Greek school student learns, children whose bodies did not match the Spartans' ideals of strength were tossed. This was not taught as a legend like Odysseus' journey or the stories of the gods, but as history. None of my history books questioned this story. I remember standing on that mountain, firs and pines all around, looking at the gray stone on which my body would have been broken had I been born earlier and imperfectly formed. I felt lucky to have a body that was properly formed and was safe. I'm gonna cut to being in Missouri and watching the Gay Pride Parade in Cyprus. The appearance of videos and online reports on my Missouri screen slows eventually as the parade in Cyprus comes to an end. No one has been hurt. I search obsessively for more videos of the religious banner-bearing men. I want to watch even though it hurts. I later ask myself what drove this compulsive watching over and over and why it felt good. I realized that it felt good to have proof that all these years I feared a hatred that was real, that this is what they do. This is what they would have done if I had shown them who I am. Behind the closed policeman line, another man who wants to get past to the Pride Parade holds a stick ripped from his banner, the tatters of the word-bearing cloth fluttering in the wind. He raises it high in the air so that the blow will crash with great force onto the helmet of a policeman. Instead, his blow hits the cassocked shoulder of a running monk, raising his arm up to prevent more violence. The monk walks with his hands outstretched and begs the Christians to stop hitting the police. But men with sticks keep charging past him. It is too late. Their official decrees and their sermons about the threat posed by the gays and their supporters have already been taken to heart. While I wait for more videos and images to come from Cyprus, I tune into an American tribute to Baldwin, honoring the writer's 90th birthday. During a discussion of Baldwin's queerness, someone challenges the panelists. Would you die for the word queer? Are you willing to die or would you lie? Soon, Cyprus has gone to sleep. There is nothing more to watch on my computer. And I go for a run in the humid Missouri heat. I think of my friend Carolyn Forche, who told me about the talks for Baldwin's 90th birthday, and who has always insisted that one person's art can change the world a little bit. She went to El Salvador when a war was brewing to bring back the truth in her poems. The year we met, on study abroad in Greece, I explained that I was trying to decide whether to give up my Orthodox faith or renounce my love of women and remain celibate, because there aren't any people who are both Orthodox and gay. You'll have to be the first, she said. Stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being the audience, and to everybody else who's the audience who we can't see, but we see each other, and sometimes that's enough.
Right, exactly. Yes, yes. It's oddly like writing where you just assume people are out there, but you don't have them in mind just yet.
Oh, I used to write Joanna of the future in my diary. Joanna of the future, are you laughing at your former self or do you respect her?
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And do you go back now and read those journals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really handy, although, as you know, as a writer, we need to have events and tactile things, but all I wrote was thoughts. So I know exactly what I was thinking and feeling, but I don't have much in the way of the tangible, so I have to guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So Joanna, tell us a little bit about how this book came to be, and describe it a little bit, kind of the arc of the book.
I think that it moves recursively. I like to say when I decided, and I have the same question for you, but I decided how to organize the chapters, I realized that the easiest way for just readers to hold on to the narrative would be to organize them as chronologically as possible, but I wrote them. I came back to the U.S. for grad school for deadlines. I like to say I was in Cyprus teaching ESL and writing the same sentence over and over again, and I came back for grad school. And being in school required me to write various essays, which have their own origin stories. But I wrote the different essays on different compulsions, like anger or sadness, curiosity, and for classes. That one, that's Cypress Pride, Natalie Diaz, who is a finalist for the National Book Award currently, she gave me the idea for that and my other favorite essay. I was describing the Pride Parade to her, and she's like, and that image of the banner that became a weapon, she's like, write that. I'm getting off the phone, write about that. So I need more people to tell me to write about images, because then they explode. And then I put them together.
Yeah, that's great. And so at what point did you understand that this was a book, right? Because we write essays here and there, but then at some point we understand that there's something at the center of a collection of them.
I thought that I was working on 2 books, because I was obsessed with the questions of my Greek identity. And then I started working out, as we do, my questions of my sexuality in essays, and I saw them as separate essays. I even wrote my job letter in the last year of my PhD program, talking about my first book being about being Greek and my second book being about sexuality, a second project. And actually it was in my dissertation defense. I'm imagining Alex and Scott and Elaine and Yulia out there. And they were like, I apologize. I opened my dissertation defense with an apology. I said, I'm sorry. I know I have these 2 books that I smushed together just so I could graduate on time, because if I had to finish one of them, I never would have graduated. And they're like, are you kidding? The most interesting thing about this book is how laying over our need, and I started asking myself the question, why do I care so much about being Greek, being my frustrated emotions about being American? What does that matter so much? And why does it matter to be perceived correctly as a lesbian, to be read correctly? And why do those things feel so similar? And then one shed light on the other. And so then seeing that those 2 identities were counterpoints, one for the other, allowed me to keep working on the book and thinking of it as a long investigation of that question.
Mm. That's interesting, because there's a line in the book where you talk about how as a child, when you were in New York, so just for people who aren't familiar with the kind of story that I'm just going to, such a brief summary, but that you were born in Cyprus.
No,
born in the US. Moved to, and you, okay, yes, I'm sorry. And I knew that you were in the US for your early years, and then moved to Cyprus through high school.
Right.
Then came to the US for college. And at one point when you're writing about your early time in the US, you said as a child, Greekness felt like a chore.
Yeah.
Right? Which is really interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also about how your relationship to being Greek has changed throughout your life.
Yeah, thank you, Michele. It's so amazing. This is my first book, so it's so amazing, the feeling of having a reader. So I reflected back on what it felt like as a kid, and I just remembered, and there's in that same passage, I dramatize saying the word, I am a little Greek American, Ime Ellino-Amerikanopulo. And it was so hard because I took Greek as a second language. My mom started teaching me Greek when I was 3. So saying Ime Ellino-Amerikanopulo was really hard. All of my other schoolwork was pretty easy, and Greek was really hard. And all the sort of trappings of being Greek, like wearing the costumes and doing the dances right, it all felt like something that I had to do. And so now that I can watch it as an adult, it's also interesting, like, why do people do all this extra work? And so many people who express identity, like, why do they do all that stuff? And I'm still asking the question. But when I went to Cyprus, there were only a couple of Americans in my school. Everybody else was actually largely from the other English-speaking countries. Cyprus used to be a British colony, so a lot of people went to England and came back. So they were mostly like British Cypriot, Australian Cypriot, and being American made me different. So I didn't want to be American. Plus, when I was a teenager, I got into this rock music scene, and they were very Marxist and leftist and really against the nascent neoliberal like Marshall Plan and all the ways in which American capitalism had infiltrated Greece. I didn't really understand everything. They were just against Americans. America had supported a dictatorship, shockingly, because if you look at where Greece is, it's right next to all the communist countries, and Greece had and still has this very strong leftist faction. And so the US was afraid that Greece would go communist, and they supported a military dictatorship that would suppress leftist politics. And this is all really hard to write about, and it took me a long time to figure out how to make all this history that is, as your question illustrates, necessary to my story. Like, I can't really answer your question, what does being American in Greece mean, without telling you about the CIA supporting that dictatorship.
Sure. Sure, it's the context of a life, right? And it's a complicated one, and it's one that readers need to be either educated about or reminded of, right?
Yeah, and part of learning to write was figuring out how to manage giving readers the information, but also giving them some story and more fun things to read than history. And it took me a long time to figure out that balance. I don't know if you also had that learn.
Well, yeah. I think that narrative is just an incredibly powerful rhetorical mode, right? And it is one that I think we sometimes want to move away from a little bit, because, you know, as writers we're experimenting and playing around. But I think that that often the complicated stuff does come to us best through narrative. And so, I mean, I feel like you did a really brilliant job in this book of distilling down the complexity of that context and of that background, and funneling it through very specific moments in your life. Yeah, so I'm not surprised to hear that it was time consuming and took a lot of work to do that. Yeah.
Thanks.
I wanted also to ask, because the book isn't entirely chronological, right? I mean, it kind of moves around in time. It opens with laying your father to rest in Cyprus, and then moves on from there and comes back periodically to that moment, or that experience. So how difficult was it for you to organize?
It was just extremely difficult. I didn't really have that much hope that I would figure it out. I turned the book into a memoir in the summer of 2018, and made it, you know, and I'm curious about your opinions as well. Some people are like, oh, they're very similar, it's just a matter of nomenclature. No, it was a year of work to create it chronological and add what, what's her name? Megan, gratuitous connective tissue is what, her name is escaping me, an essayist who turned her essays into a memoir. The one about the house, My Life Would Be Perfect If I Lived in That House. It'll come to me.
Is it Megan Daum?
Yes.
Okay.
She said that she took that essay collection, which I think would have been better as an essay collection now that I read it. She turned it into a memoir and added all that connective tissue. And I did the same thing, because I'm like, maybe this needs to be a memoir since it is so much about me coming into myself. And I did that. I sent it to a couple of agents. And then when they didn't like it, I was like, that's it, I'm done. I tried. And I turned it back, but I wonder if the lessons of figuring out what the story arc would be if it were a memoir illuminated for me what I needed to keep about that trajectory of becoming who I am, and how I could, I think, and I hope that it takes a somewhat of a minor role so that the themes and the ideas could rise a little more powerfully to the surface than they were able to in a memoir that was entirely focused on how I came to be who I am.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because to me, your book reads very much like a memoir in essays, right? I mean, I think that there is this unfortunate push very often with memoir to smooth out the bumps in our actual lives. And I think those bumps and those kind of the episodic way in which we live and in which we remember, right, is sometimes gets lost in straightforward memoir. And so I'm a really big fan of the memoir and essays, even though it is a tough beast to try to seduce others into in the publishing world.
And that would be a great segue, because I want to know, this really reads like a real essay collection. And I've read other essay collections this summer that I think are memoirs because there's so much about how the person came to be. And there's a lot of continuity in that question. Whereas I'm a little jealous of the way you so successfully, it's amazing, you managed to really do what I'm trying to do, which is use personal experiences as vehicles or vessels for meditation. And I love how you reflect. Your reflection is so succinct. You manage, and I wonder if you, like, how you achieve that. It feels like very disciplined, how the meaning, the truth, these like wisdom lines that are really brilliant. For example, in the essay that you read from, where you say sometimes the essay that you read from is called, I should have written it down. Sometimes the vast possibility is all there is. And the truths, something I struggle with when I write those kind of truth lines is that people are like, no, it's not. And yours are spot on and you nail it. And I can't imagine anybody disagreeing. So I'm wondering how you pull that off, and how you manage to allow those ideas to be, from my point of view, salient as opposed to your personal experiences being salient.
Mm-hmm. See, it's interesting what you said about genre, because my book to me feels very much like a memoir in essays, but it's a memoir that is not, I'm not so interested in how I became X, Y, or Z so much as how a person experiences the continuous process of becoming, right? So I kind of think of this as a book it's a coming of ages book, right? Because we tend to use that phrase coming of age as being about, stepping into adulthood or, moving into adulthood from adolescence or childhood. And I think that adulthood is not monolithic, right? There are all these stages of it, and some of them are different for different people, but there's sort of a progression that we go through. And I think that we're always in the process of becoming this next version of ourselves. So in a way, the book explores that, but it also has kind of a memoir built into it, which is this story of my adolescence in the 1970s when my mother left my father for a woman. And that sparked kind of a custody battle and a whole fracturing of our family. And so it's got a really funky structure if you think about it as a memoir, because it kind of toggles back and forth between those earlier experiences and then later adult experiences with these various forms of unconsummated romance. I don't think I got anywhere near your question.
I love that. That really works for me. And I have two related questions that I'll throw at you together so you can figure it out. My one big question is similar to what you asked me. When did you decide / realize that it wants to be centered around these moments of unconsummated romance? And secondly, a slightly more technical question that I had to deal with. When and how did you figure out what the vantage point of kind of the end, because at some point we keep on revising, but the events that are in the book have to stop, and we keep living, and we have to stop putting things in. And you have a very so the reason this book is so easy to read, even though you jump around in time, is because I think you really solidify where we are right now in like a voice. There's this mature voice that starts us out similar to mine, a little early, a little older, and then casts us back to your adolescence. But I feel really solid in time while we're moving around all those dramatic events.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you, I started out putting this in chronological order. And it didn't feel exactly right, but I sent it off to the editor of my first book, who's a wonderful mentor to me, Carl Klaus. And he was like, why don't you get rid of that adolescent stuff? Huh. And so I took it out, and then I looked at it and thought, I'm not that interested in my own experiences, just as experiences, right? What interested me most was the friction between these adult experiences and this adolescent period when I was watching very keenly. My mother developed this new romantic relationship that was so different from anything she'd had with my father, but was also so shrouded in secrecy. So I was kind of becoming aware and experimenting in my own mind with what romance was and what did I want. And so I just thought, well, the book is not working in chronological order, so I have to find a way to interlace it. And then I just thought, well, why don't I just focus on memory? And this is why it feels more like a memoir to me, because it's really the story of memory. You know, as you're having experiences, you're always looping back to earlier experiences and kind of running the present through the past and vice versa. So I wanted to, and then I just didn't know if I could get away with it. It just seemed so crazy to be doing this back and forth thing. But yeah, I had readers take a look and they, felt like it worked. So then I thought, well, no, this is it. And I do think that part of that deciding where the end point is it's just very useful when you're writing about your own personal experience, again, as a means of getting to something else, right? I think it's important to go like, okay, here's the thing I'm making. And the thing I'm making goes from this moment to this moment, and that's it. And whatever happens after that is for the next book. But like, I've got my material, and now I'm just gonna, I'm gonna craft it. I'm gonna shape it until it works. Yeah.
That's really interesting that your teacher told you that the by itself childhood is boring. My memoir, when I put it in the memoir form, I also started with childhood. I didn't write about my childhood at all at first. And another Mizzou professor, Maureen, forced me to write about childhood, in the sense of asked me 3 times. And I was like, I was really pouty about it too. I'm sorry. And then I was like, well, it's written. Guess I'll put it in the book, right? Like, and it's early. So I put in, and my fiction writer friend, Jen Julian, gave me 2 critiques on the memoir. First of all, she's like, the childhood stuff is boring. And similarly, it's like childhood experiences are only fascinating in the context of the friction. Yeah. And secondly, she actually said, you have to come out to your mom, because I hadn't at that point. And so that's another huge issue that will keep that is a big conversation, right? Like, what do you do so this was 2018, it was actually right before there's the penultimate essay dramatizes what hadn't happened yet when I turned the essay collection into a memoir. Mm-hmm. Which is, my mom realized that I'm gay, and she's like, I don't want to tell you to live your life according to, what's dramatically important, but it's really, and I wonder what you think now, hearing that as somebody who read the book complete, I think she was right, that there was something really missing.
I mean, for the book, and I'm going to venture to guess for your life, I think that was great advice. But it is a case of, you know, life imitating art, right? Or needing to, or, you know, I mean, that's really interesting. So that's partly what I wanted to ask you about as well. You know, we always get asked as writers about writing about real people. And so here you are, your mom is a figure in this book all the way through. I mean, she's actually a fantastic character. I love the episode, you know, in Cyprus where she insists on everyone going to church, even though it's snowing out and the church isn't even open. And so everyone goes, your whole family goes trudging. And so she just is this very, wonderful, very devout, and very, there's no room for nuance, or she is very strict, right? And so, and then you write about her during this, you know, how has she responded to that? How was it for you to write about her in this way?
Been really hard. Funnily enough, my master, when I was preparing my MFA thesis is about a quarter of this book, and my advisor was like, so, you know, you have to be prepared for any questions. For example, be prepared to answer the question, why is your mother nowhere? And I actually said, my answer was, well, she's not an interesting character and my dad is, which is something that I can take up. Actually, another thing that I think I need to take up in another book is that way in which gender operates. I wrote kind of almost a like, I'm done with this book essay, and published it recently, where I investigate the way my father really dominates, and the way some friends of mine pushed me to recognize that a lot of us daughters are easier on our dads. And so I, you know, I was very forgiving of my dad, and wasn't interested in writing about my mom. But then when he passed away, I had no other parents to write about. So obviously I had to start. And she also became a larger figure. And so these events happened. And, you know, as being a writer, like my mom is telling me like the hardest thing I've ever had to hear. And part of my brain is like, that's so quotable. Like I'm totally devastated,
right,
destroyed inside. But being a writer is part of my brain is like, I can't believe she used those perfect words.
Right. Right.
Joanna, I exhort you to renounce homosexuality. I was like, thanks, Mom. And so then, you know, it was all really hard. I don't have trouble writing about it, but then I was feeling a little like, oh man, I'm feeling a little guilty about portraying my mom as homophobic. So what should I do about that? And then when she harangued me again recently, my reaction was, well, she's bringing it up, so I might as well put it out there. And so I said, and this is not in the book, secret guys, she was haranguing me about how I have to say, and I was like, no, you don't. It's like, I have to say, you know, you're fornicating or whatever, which as my book suggests, similar to your like unconsummated love, like not much. I had to put in the book, I wonder if you saw that, sorry, I'm taking a little bit of a sidestep, but in my dissertation defense, my beloved women professors were chatting with each other, talking about how they were reading towards figuring out whether I had finally like found a girlfriend. And I was like, you could have just asked me, guys. But anyway, but how powerful narrative is, like I became a character and they were reading to find out whether the character. So I'm like, my mom is telling me I'm going to go to hell for fornicating. Meanwhile, I don't even have a girlfriend. And so while she's haranguing me the most recent time, and it doesn't come up often, and obviously I avoid it, she says, my answer was, Mom, so you know I'm writing this? I was like, I had nothing else to say to that. So I was like, I might as well tell her that. I was like, I don't feel guilty about, you know, the sex that I'm not having. But I do feel like it's my responsibility. Like, I don't know, like the ethics that I'm concerned about is that I'm writing all this. And she said, it's not what I say. It's what the fathers of the church say. So I was like, so I have your permission? And she was like, yeah, write whatever you want.
Oh my goodness.
So I've still been terrified. And then she read that chapter, and all she said was, she didn't address the issue, and she said, "I'm really proud of you." And it's really professional writing. Like, almost like I can't tell you're a person I know. She's a high school English teacher that reads, Shakespeare and Herman Melville. And so she doesn't really expect contemporary writing to feel like real writing. And so she was surprised. So thank you for that.
That's great. Wow. That's fabulous. I have a million more questions, but I want to check in with Alex and see. It's 7:45. So Alex, did you want to come back in now?
Oh, I see a question.
There's a question. Here's Alex. Hello.
Hello. Am I back? I can't see myself.
You are back.
See you.
Oh, I need to. Oh, there I am.
You look like.
Okay. Yeah, we have got some questions. Let me see. So Kavita asked, this is a question for you, Joanna. What year was this when the first Pride Parade in Cyprus took place, and what is it like to be gay in Cyprus today?
2014, and it's not that bad, actually. I think I've been to a couple of more of the Pride Parades in Cyprus, just it coincides with our Greece program. So I've gone, and they've all been uneventful. There's more stigma, obviously, than there is in the typical US city, but I think it's been okay. It was also, there was a British law. I say this in the beginning of the essay. There was a British anti-sodomy law that was only taken off the books when I think the European court forced Cyprus to take the anti-sodomy law off the books. And I had finished my freshman year in college when it became legal to have sex, for two men to have sex in Cyprus, which is common in a lot of, I found out later that it was the same thing in Texas.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. And then another question for you, Joanna. Monica said, what's the one thing that you wish that Joanna of the future could tell Joanna of the past?
Oh my God, one thing?
I'm just reading what it says.
I wish she had believed in herself a little more, and it's going to be okay, that one day you'll be safe. I wish I could have said that. One day you'll be safe.
Okay.
And you'll find good people. One more thing. You'll find good people.
Yeah, you're allowed to. That's completely fine. All right. Then we had a question from Sky, and this is for both of you. So early on, you quipped about writers assuming that there is an audience out there. Was your motivation for writing to a potential audience, or was it more rooted in being your own audience? Perhaps Michele, you could answer that one.
Yeah, I think it goes back and forth. I try not to think about readers too early in the process, because I don't necessarily imagine hospitable readers, though one is served better if one can do that. So it's, at first, I'm just trying to feel my way around and find the form that is most appropriate for a particular set of experiences and material and research. And then at a certain point, I really start thinking, okay, how is this going to look to readers? And it's that point of kind of peeling yourself away from your own life and becoming, this is something I was going to bring up, Joanna, right there at the end, this idea of becoming a character in your own work, right? I mean, we say this all the time, but the grammatically singular I in nonfiction is always plural, right? It's always the writer at the time of writing and one or many more previous selves who are kind of milling about. And so at any given moment, the narrative is aligning itself with one of those people. And, it's the current writerly self, I think, who's often the drumbeat throughout, who kind of keeps us on a path. So at a certain point, you start thinking like, okay, who is this narrator and how do I want to shape her? And you become aware that even the writerly self is not the actual self. And you start playing around with developing that character further. What would you say to that, Joanna?
I would agree entirely, and then kind of add that I would divide the two different audiences I imagine. I imagine that you might first feel like you're writing to an extremely compassionate, warm, open listener who understands. And that's my, people are like, why do you write? And that's not a thing. I've been struggling recently, and I told a therapist I'm like, can't write. And she's like, why don't you just not write? And I was like, are you trying to say I should die? I can't really not, Alex is a writer too. He understands you don't not write. It's not a thing. But I imagine I have this urge for someone to understand. I want someone to understand. And that's the huge triumph, this huge excitement of having produced a book. And even my conflict with my mom, I'm like, you can't tell me that it's not real. It's right here. I really feel these things and you can't deny it anymore. So, and then that uber compassionate reader doesn't buy books. And so you have to shift and imagine what an audience would need to hear, and then the kind of context that you have to add. For example, in this essay, the famous Anna Visi talks about gay people being normal, which is exciting. And then I call her the Greek Madonna, but a Greek person doesn't need her to be defined. And then I read at the Modern Greek Studies Association, and I had to take out another essay. I had to take out a slew of things that I didn't think of. They're really necessary for an American audience. So, but not for a Greek or Grecophile audience. So yeah.
So interesting.
And I have an essay that's started as a letter, which I actually, my dad said something to me. I went into the other room and started writing him a letter. And, 15 years later, it's an essay in the book.
I love those origin stories when they're there. It's they're precious things. So Miles wrote in the chat, and Michele, this is for you, coming of ages. Yes, I rather like that too. And he says, I'm going to quote you on that in my workshops, but before I steal your ideas, can you explain them a little more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that phrase "coming of age" implies that there is a kind of a finitude to that arriving into adulthood, right? But I mean, I remember being 22 and 25 and 31, and the whole time thinking, I'm still playing at this adulthood thing. I don't feel like I have things figured out. I'm just going through the motions. And then there are certain, markers of adulthood, beginning a career, getting married, having children, etc. And if you're not doing those things, it feels like you're in kind of this extended adolescence and you're trying to figure out how to understand yourself. In my case, I did everything backwards and ended up having a child later in life than I imagined physiologically possible. And so it's been this constant process of figuring out, who am I now? And so I think that there are ages and ages and ages that we go through, and we go through these big sort of coming into ourselves moments, and we think, well, okay, now here I am. And then 5 years later, the kid has grown a bit, and now you're like, okay, wait, now I'm different. Even within the context of that, I'm shifting again. So it's just something that I think is ongoing all of our lives. And that's just how it feels to me. And so I think the book was kind of capturing those weird moments because I think that's what unconsummated romance does, at least for me. When I develop a crush or fall in love, however inappropriately and however Oddly, given that I'm partnered and have been for a long time, and I still have crushes and still fall in love periodically, these are moments when I feel like I have that kind of occasion deep reflection on who I am and how I live and how I want to continue living. So it does real work in one's life, and important work, provided I think that we're willing to accept it and not freak out about it, and not necessarily think that it means everything in life has to be turned upside down.
Okay. Well, Miles, I hope that answered your question. Joanna, this is for you. This is from Christopher Backen. It's been a joy to watch your ideas about this book develop over the past years, especially during those summers on Thesos, if I pronounced that right. Can you talk a little about what it's meant for you to be immersed in a Greek-speaking place that is not Cyprus, and it's certainly not Missouri or New York either?
Well, I have an essay called Dancing Greek that takes place entirely in something that actually started, Alex, as you came to Columbia. I don't know when you arrived, but there was a study abroad program at the University of Missouri, and then it morphed into its independent nature now. But I remained a Greek teacher, and I'm eternally grateful because I found in Greece, which is a country where I've spent a long periods of time, but do not hold a passport to. I have a Cypriot passport and I have an American passport, but I don't have a Greek passport. What happens in Greece is that, I'm smiling when I'm saying, my outsiderness, sorry, I'm framing the question now, the answer now. When I'm in America, everybody, because Greekness is such a big part, see, I even have a friggin' flag on the wall. Like, Greek Cypriotness is such a huge part of my identity. When people don't know I'm Greek after like meeting me 3 times, I'm shocked because it's such a huge part of my identity. And then in Cyprus, because of the way I talk, because I have an accent that they identify as English all the time, unfortunately, Alex, you know, anybody who's been to London has met a British Cypriot, and there's so many. London has more Cypriots than I think all of Cyprus.
Really?
Interesting.
Yeah. There's that many Cypriots in London. It's ridiculous, right, Alex? Like, Cyprus is smaller than Connecticut, plus it's half occupied. How many Cypriots do you think fit? Right. So everybody assumes I'm British, and I'm like, I'm not British, you know. And here, people, because nobody leaves America, so everybody thinks I'm an immigrant from Greece or Cyprus. So everybody gets me wrong. Everybody thinks I'm from elsewhere, including in Cyprus. And then as soon as I turn up in Greece, they hear my accent and they're like, oh, you're from Cyprus. And I'm like, yeah. And that's it. End of story. So Greece is the only place where I'm read as a person, as an identity that I actually possess, as an insider. And also in our wonderful program, which you should all come on, they need somebody who translates, and I compulsively translate. It's a way of taking my halves and like making me into one person, because I have a Greek side of my brain and an American side of my brain, and I'm constantly trying to translate for each other because I feel like part of me is constantly left out of the conversation. So I compulsively translate, and guess what? In a place where I'm surrounded by Americans in Greece, all the Americans want me to translate what's happening for them. So I have my liability becomes an asset in Greece.
That's great. That's fascinating. All right, so we're just coming out to 8 o'clock, so we've got time for, I think, one more question. This is from Leanna, and this would be for both of you. I sometimes sense that memoirists feel hesitant to write about only the personal. There's this desire to connect to themes and things larger than the individual, as if the small and idiosyncratic isn't as worthy of attention. Do you all feel that pressure? And I also wonder if that pressure is gendered. So Michele, if you could go first.
Yeah, I think there is a pressure. So I want to speak about this from 2 different angles. On the one hand, I do think that memoirists can easily fall into the trap of believing that because something happened to them, it is inherently important. And that is maybe true for the person writing, but I don't think it makes for good literature, that stance generally. So I do think, but I also think that it isn't necessary to reach and reach and reach for external validation for one's experiences. But the way to get to something larger than the self is by going through those small experiences, by drilling down into them and not being content just with the surface level meaning that we live with very easily. At the same time, I do think there is, especially in nonfiction, a very gendered assumption that women writing about their lives are somehow creating art that is less than. And so I always bristle at this notion that it must, you must be aiming head on at something huge and universal, and in order for the work to be important. Joanna, what would you say to that?
Oh, I have so many thoughts, but I want to get to if there's another question, because I did a AWP panel about that possibility that women's art is read as memoir and solipsistic and about the self, and then historically like Marjorie Kemp and them. And I posed the question, do we read older nonfiction by men as about the larger world? So I posed it kind of the flip side of that question, and it just bears a lot more thinking. And I love that idea of bristling and insisting on writing that women's lives are inherently as important as men's lives. So interesting.
Yeah, well, I kind of saved that one for the end because I thought it was a goodie to finish on. I don't know, I think it also applies to fiction too, in the same way. All right. Do either of you have any final comments or other questions you want to ask each other?
I just want to tell everyone to buy Joanna's book and read it and enjoy it. Yes, yes, yes. And buy from Skylark. And support independent bookstores.
Yes, this is an amazing book. And tell us what other overlap you see that we didn't see, because I think there's a lot of really fascinating, they're almost like flip mirror images. Me reading about Michelle's mom, I was even embarrassed. I was like, Michele takes everything in stride. I'm like so dramatic.
No, it's been a while, so a lot of processing.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been, I mean, I don't know about everyone, I feel much smarter than I did an hour ago. So I'm very grateful to you both. It's been an absolutely compelling conversation. Just to wrap up, we do love to do these events, but in order to continue putting them on, we really do need your support. These are hard times for everybody. Our doors have been closed for over 6 months now. And so if you can, we really would appreciate it if you would buy a book from us, or maybe even 2. That would be great. Again, it's mail@skylarkbookshop.com or 573-777-6990. Don't forget that tomorrow we welcome Darren Strauss to Skylark to discuss his wonderful new novel, The Queen of Tuesday, which is based on his grandfather's affair with Lucille Ball. So that will be a fascinating discussion too, I am sure. Joanna, Michele, thank you both so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. And
thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching, and see you all soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wow.